Hey yo, what's up, everybody? It's Soda Tsudo, the new Whatiffer, and welcome back to a new video. I don't got much to say before the actual video starts, other than if you look down in the description, there's my Discord. Discord members usually get early releases of my videos. So if you want early release or if you want to see anything like that, before it's actually ready to come out, you can check over there. Along with that, there's also the TFP Discord. It's a group that I'm in. I'd appreciate it if you go support them. Or you could support AAG Demon separately, or even go and support someone like, you know, FY or FWB. I apologize. And other people like that. So without a further ado, okay, let's get into it. So look, right, Izuku's basically sitting at his school desk as he's in his very last class of the day. He's staring down at a few kunai and shuriken that he has on his desk, thinking about what happened to his mom and everything, and, kind of what the doctor said. So, flashback real quick. In the first couple of weeks of Izuku learning his new quirk abilities, the doctor basically told him, okay, so look, as far as what I can tell, these weapons that you make, there's no real limit to what type of weapon you want to make, other than if you understand how the weapon works and resources, along with how much stamina it takes you. As Izuku kind of just looks at him as he says, what do you mean by how much stamina it takes me? Uh, he kind of looks at him as he says, you didn't notice? As Izuku says, notice what? As, you know, the doctor kind of sighs as he says, okay, look, there's a couple of things. First things first, the weapons that you're making, they are pulling upon your stamina. We don't know how yet, but it's almost like the more weapons that you make, or the bigger the weapons that you make, the more draining they are on you. And the bigger the cost is for these types of weapons. So, for example, whenever you make something like a kunai, you know how your kunai are only about maybe smaller than the size of a hand? As he kind of nods as he says, let's say you make a sword. That sword's going to cost at least triple or quadruple the amount of stamina that it would take for the kunai. As Izuku kind of looks at him, as he kind of says, so doesn't that make my abilities inefficient if it's draining that much of my stamina? As the doctor kind of smiles as he says, well, there's the good thing about your abilities. First off, as far as what I can tell, all of your bodily functions have been increased. So, generally, right, you have more stamina than the average person. That's probably why you don't notice your stamina getting drained whenever you're creating these weapons. Along with that, you don't create very many weapons. So, whenever you do create these, you don't really notice a difference between energy. As Izuku kind of says to him, so with that being said, is this a bad thing? As the doctor kind of gets a more serious face as he says, it can be. So the problem is, it's not necessarily fatal, at least as far as what we can see, but it could greatly hinder you in the future. So let's say something happens and you created a whole bunch of weapons. That could drain so much of your stamina that it becomes hard for you to move or becomes hard for your body to perform the feats that it normally is able to perform easily. As Izuku kind of, sits there as he ponders, as he says, so basically, I create too many weapons, or the weapon that I create is too big, and I essentially become useless. As the doctor kind of nods, as he says, but I wouldn't let that deter you. I mean, as far as what I can tell, you have one of the best physical enhancement based abilities. Your physical speed, strength, and durability are even comparable to some low level rookie heroes, which not a lot of people can say. If you were to, for example, go to UA, you could be very, very successful. As Izuku kind of thinks to himself, as he just kind of says, but the quirks and abilities that I'm used to are a lot more flashy and have, way more spread out abilities. As far as what I can tell, I'm just very physically abled and I can create weapons. I mean, it's not that my abilities are useless, it's just not something that I'm used to. As he kind of says, and as far as what I can tell, I can't make anything like guns because I can make the components for it, but I can't make gunpowder and things like that. I can only make the metal aspects of the gun. As the doctor kind of pats Izuku on the back as he says, if I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't let it get to me. As Izuku kind of, nods as he says, I mean, I guess. As he kind of gets up as he says, by the way, thank you, doctor. As he kind of pauses as he says, um, what did you say your name was? As he says, oh, my name's Ayama. As he says, oh, well, thank you, Mr. Ayama. As he kind of, shakes the dude's hand. And we fade back into reality to where we currently are. As he's kind of still zoning out, thinking to himself, I mean, I know I don't have useless abilities, but knowing how one-track minded I usually am, I'm probably going to forget half of the things I can do mid-battle. As when he kind of says that, he gets hit inside the side of the head with a paper ball. As he kind of looks over and looks down at the ground. As, a student points forward. As he kind of looks as he sees the teacher kind of staring directly at him. As Izuku kind of, says, were you talking to me? As, the teacher says, I said your name over 5 times. What do you mean, was I talking to you? Look, I understand the entire situation that happened with your mom, and I understand that you might still be broken up with it. But it's been over 6 months. You're about to go to high school. You have to get over it at some point. As, Izuku kind of, looks down as he kind of sighs and says, I understand. As the teacher looks at him as he says, you say that every day. You obviously don't understand if you're not doing anything to fix it. You keep zoning out into class, and the only thing that you actually do is write down information about those silly quirk things that you did before. You finally have a quirk of your own. It's not like you're quirkless. As he kind of says, instead of focusing on fiction and what you would have been able to do if you had something different, focus on what you can do now. As, Izuku kind of just looks up at him as he nods. As the teacher says, Okay. Um, I guess since I spent 5 minutes yelling at Izuku, class is over. So, I was very glad to teach all of you, and I hope all of you have a good life going forward from now. As, a couple of kids are, talking on some shit, saying their goodbyes, everything like that, hugging their friends. As Izuku kind of just simply gets up and he grabs all of his stuff and starts to head out. As soon as he's out of, like the eye line of anybody, he begins writing inside of his book about different things that he might be able to do with his abilities and his strengths and weaknesses. And as he kind of is doing that, he eventually gets outside, as checks both ways across the street and closes his book, as he kind of begins to walk, as he's thinking to himself, okay, this is going to be a problem. As far as what I can tell, if I if I make too many of these and anything happens around me, can limit my physical abilities and make it so that I can't defend myself as easily as I normally could. As he kind of groans and grabs the top of his head in frustration, and as he does that, he kind of stops and instantly jumps back. As he kind of stops and looks around and sees nothing. As he kind of says, what the hell was that about? As he's kind of checking his body, making sure everything's fine. So he says, was that just reflex? And he kind of looks around and notices that he just looked very weird, and luckily nobody else was around to see it. So he continues to walk, and as he continues to walk, he feels something grab his shoulder. As off of instinct, he jumps over to the side. As he looks over and he sees something inside of what looks to be a corner of the bridge that he was about to walk under. As Izuku kind of just looks at that as he says, I knew I wasn't crazy. As when he thinks of that, he sees a, what is it called? Sludge-like creature inside of the kind of bridge above him. As it simply says, come here, kid. If you make this as easy as possible, I promise I'll make it quick. As Izuku kind of backs up a few steps as he says, what the hell are you talking about? As he kind of sees the thing fall to the ground, so he sees what looks to be some type of sludge quirk person. As the dude says, look, I have a couple of heroes chasing me, and I need someone as bait so I can get away. The easier you come here and get this over with, the easier it'll be for me generally. As, Izuku kind of backs up. So he says, yeah, I'm not doing that. As the sludge villain looks directly at him as he says, either you come over here willingly, or I'll come over there and I'll suffocate you. And maybe I'll see if I can fit inside of your body. Use you as a puppet. As Izuku kind of just steps back a few feet as he says, yeah, that's not happening. And as soon as he says that, he kind of summons two daggers. As the sludge villain says, great. Of course I had to get the kid that can summon weapons as his quirk. As the sludge villain lunges forward, as Izuku jumps over to the side. And as he jumps over to the side, a tentacle comes flying at him. As he slices that tentacle twice, and he jumps back. And as he jumps back, he kind of gets grabbed by the leg by that same tentacle that looked unaffected from getting sliced apart. As he gets literally slammed into the ground and thrown into the side of a wall right beside him. as that almost knocks the wind out of Izuku, but he slices the piece of sludge off of his leg and pushes off of the wall, sliding onto his hand as he kind of looks at the thing as he pushes off of the ground and lands on his feet. As he kind of looks over at his skinned hand as he says, and of course the thing has to be fast. Why aren't there any heroes nearby? As he kind of looks around, as he notices there's nobody here. So it's either he fights this thing or he dies. Okay, of course, this is how I had to end my Friday, as he kind of makes two swords. So he says, I need stronger and more powerful swords. They need to be sharp and not dull like I usually make my other weapons. That way I can slice as fast as possible. So the sludge villain looks over at him as he says, what the hell are you doing? Why are you talking to yourself? You realize I can hear you, right? As Izuku just kind of looks at the thing, and he doesn't really say anything, but the sludge villain almost notices that he's really locked in. As the sludge villain kind of lunges forward, and as it lunges forward, Izuku flips them to reverse grip and slashes the sludge villain a whole bunch of times. As the sludge villain starts laughing as he says, kid, do you not know reverse grip only works inside the movies? As he grabs the Izuku by both of his arms and hits him inside of the chest, knocking him down the street. Izuku makes like 4 kunai and throws it at the sludge villain, which obviously doesn't do much of anything, as he runs up a wall, comes from above, and slices the sludge villain in half. Into which was the worst idea possible, as the sludge villain then forms around Izuku and begins suffocating him. And as Izuku's suffocating, he's trying to like basically slice the sludge villain from the inside, but it isn't working at all. As Izuku starts to kind of panic, as he starts to push himself further and further, as he begins moving a little bit, but he still can't get out. As the sludge villain kind of, is wrangling around as he says, calm down, kid. Just let me kill you, and we can get out of this as fast as possible. The longer you resist, the more painful it's going to be. As Izuku's not really listening, as he's still thrashing around the inside of the sludge villain. And as he's kind of doing this, he's creating more and more weapons to try and slash through it, as he notices his stamina starting to deplete rapidly. And as he realizes that, his vision slowly goes blurry as he begins to lose consciousness. And after he begins to hear consciousness, or not hear, as he begins to lose consciousness, he hears someone scream from above, but he loses consciousness before he's able to notice what the hell happened. As when he eventually wakes up, he finds himself on the ground, and he looks over. As when he looks over, he sees All Might standing up, grabbing pieces of sludge from the ground and putting them into a jar. As Izuku kind of, slaps himself in the face thinking it's a dream. As, All Might walks over to him, as he asks him, are you okay, citizen? As Izuku kind of looks up at him. All Might's looking down at him. Izuku looks up. All Might's looking down. Izuku's just stuck there. As All Might kind of says, I can call an ambulance if you're hurt. As Izuku kind of, quickly gets up as he says, no, I'm not hurt. I just can't believe you're actually All Might. As All Might kind of, stares directly at him as he says, well, you better believe it. You got yourself inside of a little bit of a pickle. As Izuku kind of looks at him, and for a split second, he thinks to himself, who says pickle in real life? As All Might's basically saying next time that he sees a villain, instead of trying to fight them, he needs to call the police and wait for a hero to arrive. I saw what you were doing down here, and needless to say, it wasn't the smartest thing you could have possibly done. As Azuku says, I would have gotten my phone, but my phone broke a long time ago. So he says, you didn't get a replacement? As Azuku says, I didn't really have time or money to get a replacement. It's an entire situation. Just don't worry about it. As All Might kind of, smiles as he says, well, as long as you're okay, that's the most important thing of the day. As Azuku kind of, looks at him as he kind of says, All Might, sir, you're kind of smoking. And All Might kind of looks down as he realizes he's smoking as he says, well, good that you're okay. End of chat. As he kind of jumps away. And as he kind of jumps away, Azuku's looking up at him. He's flying throughout the sky in confusion. But he doesn't think too much of it. And eventually he kind of gets his stuff. And he starts to head back home. As he begins to head back home, he realizes how close he was to death and that he didn't like feeling as weak as he was. As he kind of walks into the house and he looks around his body and he realizes, and I forgot to collect all the weapons I made. Great. Looks like I'm going to drain more stamina. As Azuku makes a simple short sword, actually closer to a tanto. As he kind of, looks at it as he's studying the weapon. As he kind of says, what was weird about that time was the fact that I was using the weapon, but it wasn't picking up speed like it normally should. So he looks down at the sword as he kind of says, now that I think about it, it didn't have the same bluish and black tint that this one does. So he kind of swings the sword a couple of times as it starts to pick up more and more in speed. So he says, so I know it's not my quirk acting up. Why wasn't that as fast as it usually is? If it was, I probably would have been able to slice the thing into pieces. As he kind of thinks to himself as he's like, it doesn't matter. As he kind of walks over to the couch and lays down as exhaustion kind of begins to take over him. And as the exhaustion begins to take over him, he kind of slowly begins to drift off into sleep. And when he begins to drift off, he kind of blinks a couple of times and he notices it gets darker and darker. But other than that, not very much else. As he finally gets to sleep. And when he's sleeping, he's dreaming about the entire car crash that he got into with his mom and him getting the news that his mom was in a coma and him realizing that she may never wake up again. But before any of the rest of the dream can continue, he gets woken up by the news as he kind of lifts himself up and rubs his head as he looks over as he sees on the TV breaking news. The sludge villain is back again after the reported capture of All Might was seen later today on the side of the street. Apparently, the sludge villain was able to get back out whilst All Might was jumping around, and it was able to capture a 14-year-old kid as he kind of looks at this as he's kind of thinking to himself, wait, so All Might dropped it while he was jumping off in a hurry? As when he's thinking that, he kind of looks over and he realizes the kid that they're talking about is Bakugo. As Izuku lifts up fast as hell, as he basically says, what? As he sees that the sludge villain has had Bakugo captured for about 15 minutes. And that Bakugo is quickly losing air and is suffocating. So the sludge villain is making demands that the heroes go away and let him, fully get away. But All Might's nowhere to be seen, which is extremely weird since he saw him earlier today. And he would have thought after All Might dropped it, he would have likely went back to go and find where the hell the sludge villain was, much less he would have heard about something on the news. And he's also thinking to himself, how did they know that All Might even had the sludge villain? Nobody was around. As he kind of pats himself on the cheek as he says, okay, none of that is important. As he kind of gets up and he grabs the Tonto that he made earlier as he runs out of the house. As when he's running out of the house, he's jumping building from building and he's kind of running as fast as he can. And eventually he gets over to the... Sorry, the video turned off. But eventually he gets over to the heroes as he looks over to one of them and says, what exactly happened? As, the dude kind of looks over at him as he says, this is a restricted area. We're trying to get everybody out. You should leave. As he says, I can't leave. I know him. He goes to my school. As, the hero kind of contemplates whether or not to tell him. As he kind of sighs as he says, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but the sludge villain, that thing right there, it got him maybe 17 minutes ago, around that time, and it's kept him hostage. It's asking for either us to leave him alone, and he leaves the boy alone, eventually somewhere on the side of the road, which none of us believe, knowing what type of danger he is, or he kills him right here and now. As Izuku kind of realizes how serious the situation is, as he says, so you're not gonna leave him with the sludge villain, right? Like you could get him out. As the hero looks at Izuku as he says, I'm not gonna lie to you. None of our capabilities or skills are good or fast enough to be able to get him out. First things first, none of us even have the skills to fight a villain like this. Second things second, even if we did, we'd have to get in there fast enough so that he wouldn't suffocate him or kill him. As Izuku kind of, looks at this, as the hero says, I'm sorry, but as far as what I can tell, your friend's essentially dead. As Izuku kind of, takes a few steps back, realizing how extremely serious this is. As he begins to hyperventilate, as he steps back and eventually walks away. As the hero tries to check on him, but he has to keep the peace, so he stays where he is. As Izuku's starting to have flashbacks of whenever he got inside of that car crash and he wasn't able to protect his mom. And the fact that she was hospitalized as long as she was. And he's thinking about it and he's like, not only will Bakugo be hospitalized if he even survives this, he'll likely be crippled by this thing, knowing how sadistic it is. And if he's without oxygen any longer, can cause brain damage. As, he's kind of thinking to himself, but I can't do anything. I'm not a hero, nor can I get around these heroes. They'll probably just catch me faster than I can do anything. As when he's thinking this to himself, he kind of gets a flashback of whenever he was driving in the car. And he thinks about the fact that he promised whatever gods were out there, no matter what ability he got or how his abilities could be used, he'd use those abilities to help someone, no matter how or what way he can do it. He'd use those abilities to save someone else's life. As he kind of falls back into reality, as a officer walks over to him as he says, "Are you okay?" As Izuku kind of just nods as he slowly, straightens himself out. As the police officer kind of looks at him as he says, "Are you sure you're okay?" As Izuku doesn't really say anything, but all the police officer sees him do is look up, and he sees the eyes of a demon. And as the police officer kind of, staggers back, he kind of gets ready to say something as Izuku blitzes forward as fast as he can, literally knocking the police officer off of his feet. So he jumps over all of the heroes as one of the heroes tries to grab him out of shock, trying to, keep him away. But Izuku literally flies straight over him and lands onto the ground as he runs up to the sludge villain as fast as he can, so hard and so fast that he literally pushes dirt off of the ground as he blitzes forward. As before the sludge villain can even fully react, Izuku runs into the sludge villain, grabs Bakugo, and with all the strength and speed that he can, literally blitzes Bakugo out of the sludge villain, throwing him towards the crowd of people. As Bakugo gets out, right? But he slams into the crowd of people as a couple of people ended up falling over. As Izuku, with this speed, tries to run back out, but he only gets about a foot out before the sludge villain begins to pull him back in. And as the sludge villain begins to pull him back in, Izuku kind of begins to spin. And as he's spinning, he kind of slows down as he kind of realizes he can't push the sludge villain away from him like some type of quicksand to be able to create a pocket that he can jump out of. As Izuku begins to panic more and more, as he makes those blades, he makes two blades out of the metal that he made from the Tonto, forgetting completely that he even has the Tonto. As he begins to slice the sludge villain apart from the inside. As the sludge villain is, trying to keep Izuku in, but he is greatly struggling. As Izuku kind of, begins to make his way out, the sludge villain begins to wrap its tentacle around his neck and pulls his head back. As Izuku's still slicing forward, trying to get any amount of air he can. As the sludge villain then literally pulls back on his neck so hard, the bone inside of the back of his neck snaps. As Izuku goes completely limp. As the sludge villain begins to pull him back in and begins to suffocate him, Izuku hears, barely from inside of the sludge, United States of Smash. And as he hears that, he kind of literally gets pushed 30 feet back and rolls across the ground as All Might catches him. And Izuku kind of tries to keep consciousness, but before he can, fully keep consciousness, exhaustion and also the fact that he has a broken neck eventually overwhelms him completely. As eventually he completely loses consciousness again. As Izuku wakes up, he realizes a couple of things. First things first, he's on top of a roof. Second thing second, he can move, which should be impossible because his neck snapped, which people can't survive from normally. As he looks around, as when he looks around, he sees a skinny, blonde haired person. As Izuku kind of gets up as he says, excuse me, sir. Um, where am I? Last time that I remembered, I was fighting against the sludge villain, and I think he suffocated me. Is this some type of dream, or am I actually awake? As the dude kind of looks over at him, as he says, "No, you're definitely awake." As Izuku kind of looks over at him as he focuses a little bit more, as he kind of says in a little bit of confusion, not completely sure, All Might? As the dude kind of responds with his eyes looking directly at him, as he says, looks like you found me out. As Izuku says, why do you, no offense, sir, why do you look so frail and skinny? As, he kind of looks over at him as he says, well, thanks to keep my confidence up. As he kind of apologizes as he says, no, I'm joking. As he kind of lifts his shirt up, as he says, I used to be the All Might that you were able to recognize, but a long time ago I got inside of a fight with the villain that did this to me. And it made it so that I was only able to stay within my All Might form for a couple of minutes at the most. Well, are you okay? Is that life threatening? He says, I wouldn't say life threatening, more like career ending. As Azuku's kind of just looking at him in confusion as he says, why are you telling me all of this? As All Might kind of looks at Azuku as he says, what you did today was very brave. Not everyone, actually, most people wouldn't do what you did. Sacrifice their life potentially for one of their classmate. I looked into your files. Needless to say, you guys don't have the best history. But you still saw them in danger and decided to help them. As, Azuku kind of, looks at him as he says, I mean, thank you, but what about all of those people I might have hurt? As he says, all of those people you threw Bakugo into didn't have any real injuries. They hit the ground, but that was about it. Because of the fact of how many people there were inside the area, nobody hit the ground exceptionally hard. So there was no real injuries. But you even thinking about that proves that you are hero material. As he kind of looks up at him as he says, what do you mean by hero material? As All Might kind of says simply, what I mean is worthy of becoming a hero. I want you to join UA. As Izuku kind of just looks over at him as he says, join UA? Are 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 you being serious? As he says, well, if I wasn't being serious, I wouldn't have said it. As Izuku kind of just looks at him as he says, well, why do you want to offer me this position is he says, don't mistake what I'm saying. I'm not offering anything. At least not yet. All I'm saying is I feel like you should apply. As Izuku kind of says, well, why didn't you just have someone send it into the mail? As All Might says, I'm not, once again, I'm not saying you're going to get into UA. I'm saying you should take the test. I'm not the type of person to give recommendation letters. But I do feel as though if you were to apply, you do very good. You have what it takes to become a professional hero. As Izuku kind of just looks at him as he says, and why me? Why not someone with a stronger quirk? As All Might simply says, it's not fully about what quirk you have. It's about how you use it and what you're willing to do with it. You being willing to save other people's lives and to sacrifice your own, if it really came down to it, is what makes a real hero. Not money or fame or people caring about you. You being able to stand up and do the right thing. As Izuku kind of just stands there. As All Might just simply looks at him as he says, I have someone that would like to, actually, I wouldn't really say it that way, that I would like to train you. As Izuku kind of looks over at him as he says, and who's that? As All Might kind of looks at him as he says, you'll figure it out. Just stay available. As he begins to walk off, as Izuku kind of just looks at him as he kind of thinks as he's like, wait, where am I supposed to find you? And as he says that, he kind of sees the doors that All Might left through kind of close. As he sighs as he says, I think he was so much inside of his hero monologue, he didn't even think about the fact he couldn't contact me. As Izuku kind of sighs as he falls onto his back, as he simply looks up to the sky with a smile on his face, realizing that here and now is potentially where he's going to be able to become a hero. All right, that's where I'm going to leave this. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to tell me in the comments to continue. You can like or subscribe if you want to. Please join the Discord and everything like that. And I really appreciate you guys. Even with me being gone as long as I was surprised to even get more than 10 views in the amount of time that I got them. Because being gone for a year and having, even that small group of people still come back and watch your videos is unbelievable for most creators. So, yeah. I really appreciate it. So, yeah. I guess I'll talk to you guys later. And all of you, be safe. See you some other time. Bye.